All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. Got a very interesting one for everybody tonight because I'm always looking for more and more proof, and I've actually found it in a place I always suspected it would be. But anyways, I never looked at the Hebrew original until tonight, and the Hebrew original actually proves it even further. It's to the point where God pretty much said it would be, instead of suggesting that God cryptically hinted that it would be. So, tonight, what I'm going to show is that in Exodus chapter 31, when Moses was on Mount Sinai talking to God, and this is one of the very first instances where God talks to Moses about the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath and the Sabbath as law and all of that there. It's not the very first. The very first was in like Exodus 16, I think it was, talking about gather up the bread for 2 days. And then there was another one in Exodus 20. But this one here, Moses is on top of the mountain. God is telling him about it. And I just got to read a few verses here. But this is in English. So when I go and look at the Hebrew here, and I'll show you the key word that makes all the difference here, is actually very, very intriguing because the word used, and you'll see what I mean in a second, goes right in hand with what I'm suggesting here, that God did actually, he didn't even cryptically reveal it. God actually blatantly said it to Moses' face how much time there would be before the end, like overall, how long mankind would have. God told Moses to his face, apparently. So here we go in Exodus 31. Just go, we don't need to read even more of it, right? You just start at verse 16. Excuse me. It says, "And the sons of Israel have observed the Sabbath. To keep the Sabbath to generations is a covenant age during. Between me and the sons of Israel, it is a sign to the age. For 6 days God made the heavens and the earth. And in the seventh day he has ceased and is refreshed. And he giveth unto Moses, when he finished speaking with him in Mount Sinai, the two tables of the testimony, tables of stone, written by the finger of God." So this is a very important time. Moses is up there on the mountain with God, and God's speaking to him. He's right in the next breath, he's being given the first set of stone tablets. Very special, very important time. And what God said to him right there in the verse that I read, in verse 17, it says, "Between me and the sons of Israel, it is a sign to the age. For 6 days God has made the heavens and the earth, and in the seventh day he has ceased and is refreshed." So, before I used to think that this verse was just cryptically suggesting that God has made the earth in 6 days. A day with God is like 1,000 years. And in like fashion, he would give 6,000 years to mortal man. And then the seventh day, the 7,000th year, would be that of Sabbath rest, right? For mankind, for earth, and for whatever, just in general. Okay, because it will be following suit. Like, 6 days he created, seventh day he rested. Then you got mortal mankind, and then they get 6 days to prove themselves, essentially. They work and toil there, and then you get the Sabbath millennia, the seventh millennia. So that's what I've always thought, that God has just cryptically suggested it here. However, when I looked at the Hebrew here tonight, I thought to myself first. That's what made me look at the Hebrew. I was like, let me go see what the Hebrew word there for made is, because it says God made the heavens in 6 days, right? So I look up the Hebrew word, and a long story short, the Hebrew word is, so I got the Hebrew original here, and it says in English, it's for 6 days made God the heavens, right? But in the Hebrew, the word made is asah, Asah, and we go look up the definition of that. It doesn't just mean to make. And you see, this is the thing with Hebrew, okay? And something I want to point out, like Judaism today, they're very well schooled in Hebrew, obviously. If you listen to the rabbis, they're always schooling Christians on, oh, you don't know how Hebrew works. Hebrew is very complex. If you don't speak it, you can't do the science to Hebrew, right? It's pretty complex. How words can change depending on what sentence they're in and what's around them and blah, blah, blah in the context. But anyways, just using some logic and some common sense. We also, I'm going to point out, there was Bible is written in Paleo Hebrew, not Hebrew. Okay, Paleo Hebrew is an extinct and lost language now. Um, there aren't any copies. There's like a fragment that's in Paleo Hebrew, and I don't think there's much of anything else. There might be a few portions of something in Paleo Hebrew, but that's about it. It's a lost, extinct, dead language, and even back in the day of like Ezra, like 400 BC or so, it was becoming extinct or had gone extinct, and they didn't speak it anymore. And this isn't just a conspiracy; that's just a fact. History knows it. So, if in Hebrew a word, and it's kind of the same in English too, don't get me wrong, but in Hebrew, from an English speaker's perspective, when you learn about Hebrew, you have to keep in mind that if you hear a Hebrew word, it doesn't just have one definition. It can have multiple definitions, like you do see in English too, probably in every language, right? But you have to keep that in mind. If you're an English speaker like me and many others who speak English, and you're hearing about Hebrew and this and that there, you got to keep that in mind. A Hebrew word doesn't just necessarily mean one thing, and you have to look at the sentence, the context, and all that. But look at the multiple definitions of words. So that Hebrew word here doesn't just mean make, okay? It also means do, okay? And this is very important here. And if we go look at the exhaustive definition of it, which includes all applications and uses of it in the Tanakh, excuse me, it's a, excuse me. It says here to accomplish, advance, appoint, uh, be at, become, bear, bestow. Furthermore, it's a primitive root, which is to do or make. Okay, the two primary definitions are do or make. So let me simplify things real quick. We go back to Exodus 31:17, and we read that other definition of the word instead of make, because it doesn't say make in the Hebrew, it says a Hebrew word. Make is an English word. It's one of multiple definitions. So you go put the alternate definition in there, and what's God telling Moses? It says that the Sabbath is a sign. It says, to the age, for 6 days, God did or appointed, does, he's doing the heavens and the earth. And in the seventh day, he has ceased and is refreshed. Now, that fits with the flow and logistics of the sentence, right? Um, does is probably a better form of it, right? So for 6 days, God does the heavens. He appoints. Appoints is even better. That's actually one of the other definitions, but I'll get to that in a second, right? Do and make are the primary. So for 6 days, God does the heavens. Does would imply, they're happening, they're doing, he's doing whatever he's doing. He does the heavens and the earth. In the seventh day, he has ceased and is refreshed. So that actually makes sense. It fits with the flow of the sentence. But anyways, if we go look at the, I really need to get a drink of water. At the other, the rest of the exhaustive definition, right? So a primitive root, which is to do or to make in the broadest sense and widest application as follows: accomplish, advance, appoint. So these are the first few: accomplish and appoint. So in all fairness, you could also read accomplish or appoint in there as well. So for 6 days, God appointed or appoints the heavens and the earth, and in the seventh day he has ceased. Okay, that's significant. Or what was the other one? Accomplish. Accomplish means that it signifies there's a duration, and at the end of that duration, it is accomplished. Right. So this is very interesting, but it goes on. Right. Um, Appoint, become, bear, bestow, bring forth, be busy, have the charge of, commit, execute, as in do, finish, journey, keep, labor, to be industrious, to be occupied, to perform, to prepare, to procure, to provide. So when you look at like the full spectrum of the definition, those applications, each of those different word definitions may only be used one time or a few times, to each their own. I don't know, right? But they're not always used a million times in the Bible. But it shows you what the word can be used to mean. Now, make is just one. It's a primary, don't get me wrong, but it's just one of many applications that it does have. So you could take a pick out of that list that I read. A number of them work in favor of the 6,000 year theory being openly stated here. Okay? A number of them do. But even the primary does. That's all you really need. But appoint, accomplish, all those, bestow, is showing that God is giving 6 days. Now in Genesis, that's where it says that God created the earth in 6 days. Here, God is on top of Sinai with Moses telling him something important and says, hey, 6 days is work done, like on earth, and the seventh day is a Sabbath of holy rest to God. Anyone who does work in the Sabbath day is certainly put to death. This sounds like an earthly law, right? Doesn't it? Sounds like a very harsh law. But one verse later, in verse 17, because that's verse 15, skip a verse, next verse down, is where what I just read, between me and the sons of Israel, it is a sign. What is a sign? The Sabbath. Okay. Well, what is the Sabbath? It says to the age, for 6 days God does the heavens and the earth. And in the seventh day he is ceased and is refreshed. And it makes you wonder, it makes you kind of question, was God really giving them a verbatim command to, hey, if you do any work on day 7 of the earthly week, you should be put to death? Or was he really saying something like, hey, folks, you're going to have 6,000 years on earth as mortal humans, and then all that's going to come to a stop in something called the judgment day, end of days. And if you don't pass the test by then sorry, you're put into the refuse bin, right? Or the recycling bin. You're put into the Hades or hell, whatever you want to put it. You know what I mean? Whatever you want to call it. You got 6,000 years to get things right, and then it's going to be a time of refreshing, right? So if you ask me, I think in all fairness, you could say God openly told this to Moses. And that statement would actually make more plausible sense than God saying, hey, I'm giving you a law whereby if somebody works on Saturday, they should get capital punishment. That sounds pretty ridiculous and harsh. You know what I mean? But what if God was actually just saying, nope, you got 6,000 years as mortals? And because he says here, look, um, where is it? In Exodus 31:14, in the same group of few verses here, right? Not going anywhere too far else, he says, and ye have kept the Sabbath. Now, as he said, I'm not denying that maybe you shouldn't work on Saturday. God wanted a day off for people. I'm not denying that. But where he starts talking about people being put to death and this and that there, it'll make more sense, it'll be more plausible and reasonable if this here is a cryptic use of the word that God is using, right? So he says, and if you think about it in this higher spiritual sense, that he's talking about the seventh millennia after 6,000 years toiling as mortals, then this is going to come. Consider that when I read verse 14, and ye have kept the Sabbath. That's talking about the seventh millennium. For it is holy to you. He who is polluting it is certainly put to death. So if you're a sinner at the time God comes down with Messiah for the judgment day, you're a sinner, you're committing pollution, then you'll be put to death. You see what I mean? That makes sense. That's reasonable. And it says, for anyone who does work in it, that person has even been cut off from the midst of his people. So the curse to Adam and Eve with mortality, literally, if you go to Genesis and read it yourself, part of the curse is to work and toil. That's part of the punishment package, right? So mortality is death. Like, it's the death sentence. Mortality is defined by death. That's what makes mortality mortal. It's the death component. Okay, so you can see that what I'm saying here, I believe it makes perfect sense, right? So in a higher sense, God is saying, ye have kept the Sabbath. That means after 6,000 years, in the seventh millennium comes the seventh day. And those who have kept that, okay, you have to keep, by keeping the Sabbath, you have to keep it clean and honorable and this and that there, right? Meaning you have to be upstanding, you have to be righteous. If you have kept the Sabbath, for it is holy to you, right? Sorry, and ye have kept the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. But he who is polluting it is certainly put to death. So if you're mortal and the 6,000 years come to an end, here comes the judgment day. It's the start of the Sabbath. Okay. If you're still a polluter, you're put to death. What does that mean? You're not escaping mortality. You're just going further into punishments. right? And it says, for anyone who does work in it, that person has even been cut off from the midst of his people. And it says that anyone doing work in it, you have to remember, we're being workers during the 6,000 years. That period comes to an end. We're meant to stop working. If you're still polluting, you're still doing that work and doing polluting, you're cut off from the people. That's why he says in verse 15, next verse, 6 days, 6,000 years is work done, is the mortality lived, right? And in the seventh day is a Sabbath of holy rest to God, and anyone who does such work in the Sabbath day is certainly put to death. I think that's a pretty interesting, postulation here, right? But anyways, the crux of my video here is verse 17. That was verse 15, right? Where in the Hebrew it says that for 6 days God appointed, or God does, or God accomplishes the heavens in 6 days. In 6,000 years, accomplished will be the heavens and the earth. Okay, and in the seventh day, God has ceased and is refreshed. Okay, so I think it's pretty blatant, right? I think it's pretty blatant. I don't even think you have to read into it. I don't even think that it's cryptic because it's right there in the original Hebrew. God accomplished, God appointed, God does, God did the heavens and the earth in 6 days, in 6,000 years. Okay, not just that he made it. Yeah, he may have made it in 6 days in the Genesis, whether literal or whatever, 6,000 years, whatever, it doesn't matter. But this is something else. This is talking about the Sabbath, right? And this Sabbath law or system might be based upon that Genesis, origin story. But the fact is, this is something separate from the Genesis creation. This is the Sabbath law or Sabbath, the Sabbath, the appointing of the Sabbath principle. Okay, that's not the creation story. It's modeled off of the creation story, right? So we got all valid reason to believe that God here was saying, hey, just like how I made the earth in 6 days, I'm giving you all 6 days here. Okay, and at the end of it, if you ain't got things right, you're cut off. If you got things right, oh, that's great. It's time of refreshing. So there you go, folks. And when did God tell Moses this? The next breath after that, God gives Moses the first set of the stone tablets, right there in verse 18. So I think this is a pretty blatant. I mean, of all times, if you lived in the ancient times and you're to think to yourself, what is the most poignant, penultimate time for somebody, a recipient amidst mankind, to receive such divine wisdom from God about the timing of the end, and you're to pick a candidate for who it would be like Abraham or Moses, you know what I mean? Somebody like that. And then out of the two, there's like two biggest. Out of the two, you take a pick of some penultimate event. Well, I would say out of them all, it's probably Moses talking to God on top of Mount Sinai. I think that pretty much trumps anything Abraham did. No disrespect, right? And he's about to get the first set of tablets, not even the second set of tablets, 2.0. You know what I mean? Tablet 2.0, right? But no, we're talking about the OG, the original tablets. He's up there talking to God. It's OG mode 1.0, and God has just told Moses, 6,000 years I am bestowing the heavens and the earth. I am appointing the heavens and the earth. 6,000 years I am accomplishing the heavens and the earth. And then in the seventh we rest. Boom. And then, like I show in my book, which is right here, always forget to pick it up before I start. Go to Amazon, get my book if you don't already have it. It's only $11.11, so it's very cheap. Okay, 7 prophecies from God in the Bible where He reveals to us with numbers timing for the end days, right? But in here, in the first chapter, one of my own unique discoveries is using all the verses right there on the page, all the maths right there on the page, step by step. I show you 100% proof that the 6,000 years are accomplished as of 2024. Okay? The measure is taken from the birth of Seth because Adam wasn't a mortal when he was created. Adam wasn't a son of man, was he? No, he wasn't. Adam was not a son of man. He was a human, and the nickname for that is son of man, but he wasn't a son of man. He wasn't a son of woman. Whose sperm and egg made Adam? Nobody's. God created him. And he didn't even create Adam as a mortal. So Adam was not a mortal. He was not a son of man. He became one as a curse. Okay? So you don't take the measure for the punishment of mortals from Adam's creation because he wasn't even created as a mortal. Kind of irrelevant, isn't it? Right? So who was the first mortal then? Well, you'd have Abel and Cain. Cain was a sinner. He ain't worthy of counting the lineage from. And Abel was killed by Cain. That's why Cain is unworthy. So who did the lineage come from? Seth. Seth was the first born son of man, son of human, worthy one, from whom the lineage is truly counted. Okay, so Seth was born 6,000 years ago. It's all mapped out right here in chapter 1. Okay, so that's why this is even more critically but why it's even more critically important right now, because we are at the appointed time. It is 6,000 years. It has been 6,000 years. It's not even like 10 or 20 years away. It's been 6,000. It's inarguable to the exact digit. There isn't room for error, like I said a million times. All the numbers are right there on the page. You can fact check out the maths all you want. It's all right there, broken down steps, right? All the verses, where every number that I use is biblically supplied. And every single verse is right there. So there's no fluff to it. It's 100% solid, rock solid. 6,000 years all mapped out. Unless you don't want to believe the Bible, right? But the other thing is, who wrote all the chapters of the Bible where these numbers occur? I think offhand, virtually every single one was written by Moses in his books. So God told Moses, as I'm suggesting here, 6,000 years until the end. He told him that on top of Sinai. And then he also instructed Moses to write all those other books. And when Moses wrote all the other books, that's probably why, it's probably why Moses put down the ages and the year periods, the duration of times for all these specific things, because that's what I used to calculate it. I wanted the chronology. I wanted to find out what year we're in, and it turned out to be 6,000, which fits in with all the other prophecies from Daniel and everything else. It just backs up, cross references, triangulates, quadruple fold triangulates everything in. So, but the simple fact is that, yep, there you go. God told Moses on top of Sinai, and he obviously, that's the reason why he told Moses, oh, this patriarch was this years old when he had this child. Why do you think he spent all that time doing that in Genesis? Why do you think? Because there's math and stuff to calculate. What are we going to calculate? Well, it'll be pretty important to calculate. If he's stop and think about it, right? He's telling you the lineup of people. He's telling you that there is a lineup of people. And out of all the other people in the family tree, just focus on this lineage, right? So we focus on this lineage, and he's telling you the chronological order of the people and how long they live between births. Don't you? What do you think would be the logical reason why God's telling you that, telling Moses to write that? Why do you think? It's because he wants you to count and measure it all. And when you do count and measure it all, and you find out when 6,000 is, it's 2024. So there you go. Thank you. Even the categories. Isn't that right, Mr. Kitty? What do you think? Is 2024 going to be the year, Mr. Kitty? What do you think? Meow? He's looking at me like I'm crazy. So anyways, God bless you all, folks. Gotta go.